Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our panel on Santa Barbara, the American Riviera. Before we begin our discussion, I would like to introduce our moderator, Sarah McCormick. A fourth-generation Santa Barbara native, Sarah holds deep local roots in the area and has served as publisher of Santa Barbara Magazine for over a decade. She has a long-held reputation for being an excellent collaborator, dedicated to developing very smart partnerships for all her clients. Sarah has in-depth real-world experience in luxury marketing. She's a graduate of Pepperdine and resides in Montecito, lucky Sarah, with her husband and 2 children. Thank you, Sarah, so much for leading today's panel. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me, Christine. I'm so happy to be here. I'd love to take a moment to introduce our fabulous panelists and would love to have them give you a bit of their background and what drew them to Santa Barbara in the first place. So I'd first like to introduce Wade Weissmann, founder and principal of Wade Weissmann Architecture.
Hello, Sarah. Thank you very much for having me today. My background is I'm a Midwest kid and ended up starting a small boutique practice specializing in more heirloom type architecture. So have had the pleasure of working with some wonderful clients. And one of those clients brought me to Southern California about 7 years ago, where I sort of quickly fell in love with the Santa Barbara area and ended up opening an office there to service a project. And lo and behold, we've had the wonderful pleasure of meeting other professionals in the area that have kept us busy in California. So I'm kind of a newcomer, but I love it.
That's fantastic. Well, it's so nice to have you here this morning, Wade. I'd next like to introduce Mark Weaver, founder of Mark Weaver and Associates. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Sarah. So I'm also one of the lucky residents of Santa Barbara. I'm founder of Mark Weaver and Associates, an interior design firm, and was located in Los Angeles and Santa Barbara. And I remember one of my early projects was an interview in Montecito, and I came up for the afternoon and driving through this just idyllic rural community was just absolutely magical. And I got to the residence, which overlooked the Pacific Ocean, and I thought to myself, oh my God, do you think someday I'd be fortunate enough to live here? And never thinking that it would really happen. So, and it's been 36 years of living in Santa Barbara, and I consider it a real privilege.
Wow, that's so great. Well, it's so nice to have you here this morning, Mark. Lastly, I'd like to introduce Puck Erickson, principal and co-founder of Arcadia Studio. Puck, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you. Well, I got my start in the area. I'm actually the sort of country bumpkin on the panel. I live in Los Olivos in the Santa Ynez Valley, which is country just north of Santa Barbara. And I discovered Santa Barbara coming from the north, where I came to the Santa Ynez Valley, and I was visiting and drove over the San Marcos Pass in the morning and just looked down upon this town, sitting nestled against the mountains and the channel, and looking at the islands. I said, "What is that, Santa Barbara?" And it was just a magical place in this region that has all of these incredible microclimates and really long history. I don't think many people realize when Santa Barbara was settled. Being somebody from the East Coast, I thought sort of Williamsburg and Boston was all the American history we had. And so it was a wonderful thing to discover the long history and cultural history of this area with the Spanish, and it's just a wonderful spot.
So great. Well, thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
So Sarah, tell us how you ended up in Santa Barbara.
Well, I am one of the rare birds here. I was actually born and raised here, and I'm a fourth generation native. So I grew up here. I left to go to college, and I worked and lived in LA and traveled, across the country doing ad sales for national magazines. And then after I had my first child, wanted to move back to this special place. And it's interesting because I had such an appreciation for Santa Barbara. I realized I took it for granted growing up here because it was all that I knew. But having lived other places and traveled to many different cities, I realized how fortunate I was to be able to have my roots here and wanted to raise my own family here. So came back, gosh, it's been a little bit over 12 years now. My entire family's here and wanted to be close by with my family that was starting to grow. And it's a fantastic place to be. And when I moved back, I joined Santa Barbara Magazine and eventually started out as the advertising director and then was promoted to publisher. And it's just been such a pleasure to be able to be part of the team there. And really, we are the oldest publication here. We just turned 45 this last summer. And it's been really neat to watch the evolution over the years. I have all of the archives in my office, so it's quite fun to go back and read old articles and see what the advertising landscape looked like in the 70s. And we really enjoy being able to capture the lifestyle within the pages of the magazine and to deliver that not only to locals via subscriptions and on the newsstand, but we also have partnerships with a lot of the hotels in town. So what's really neat is people come here on vacation and they read the magazine in room, and then we actually have subscribers all over because the lifestyle here is so unique and it's so inspirational. So it's such a joy to be part of that publication and be able to really deliver something special, and to have, you know, these nuggets in one place for people to enjoy. So that's my story, and I'm very fortunate to be here as well.
Great.
So, Puck, you know, we had talked a little bit about the history of Santa Barbara and just some of the great properties, and you sort of touched on this in your introduction, but the architectural design here, of course, is very rooted in the Spanish style, and would love to sort of hear your thoughts on that and the history of that.
Well, I think I'll leave some of the architectural input to Wade, but I think one of the things I discovered as a landscape architect, and I'm very fortunate. My partner, one of my partners, Derek Eichelberger at Arcadia Studio, also is a historian, and so we share a great love of the background. And what's so unique about Santa Barbara is its strong horticultural history. People like Dr. Franceschi came and started an amazing nursery the turn of the 20th century, and their whole aspect was plant adaptability for Mediterranean climates, which doesn't sound that romantic, but the output of that pursuit was the beautiful landscape that you see in Santa Barbara today. That is a great sort of dialogue between native plants and exotic plants that have been brought in from all over the world and are adapted to our climate. And so you get this very unique texture of plants and architecture really playing together in such a special way. And our office just finished the renovation of the Japanese garden at Lotus Land. Lotus Land is a world-renowned public garden. You do have to make reservations to see it, but it is just a stellar garden. And the tea house that we just finished is just a treat to see. The craftsmanship is just beautiful. But I think going back to the idea of the planting being integrated with the architecture is really such a strong part of what makes Santa Barbara beautiful. And also it makes it really fun for us as landscape architects because we work very, very closely with the design team, with the architects from the very beginning. And oh, fun.
That's really neat. That's great. Well, this sort of leads into the next part of the discussion, but Wade, I would love if you would elaborate on some of the historical architects unique to this area, George Washington Smith, Luda Maria Riggs. We would love to hear your thoughts on all of the rich architectural history here in Santa Barbara.
Well, as I sort of stated earlier, I was a newcomer to Santa Barbara, and in developing the relationships with the professional community, working on the specific jobs that we were given to sort of research, and we always do research, but it's amazing how quickly you can become immersed and kind of lost in the amount of content that is available from a number of different outlets. And you're working and you're practicing and you're stumbling upon really fabulous environments and beautiful buildings. And then I would have people from my office come out to visit. I'm like, you got to see this. I discovered this the other day. This is amazing. And the more you poke around, the more you find, and the more you research, the more resources you have. And what's really remarkable is that Santa Barbara embraced, its sort of preservation might way back, almost 100 years ago. Right around the time of the Great Earthquake of 1925, when so many of the buildings along Main Street were sort of destroyed. And when you look historically at the sort of reactions to that earthquake and what an impact it made on the local area, you come to realize that there was some real leadership in the community that embraced the sort of Spanish colonial heritage that came up when Spain occupied Mexico. And then upon Mexican independence, obviously California was part of that territory. And it's just interesting that the community way back said, you know what, there's an indigenous architecture here that's beautiful, responds to our local environment. And we should set forth, some guidelines so that the city has an overall sort of quality to it. And it attracted so many amazing architects. We got a chance to restore a beautiful Francis Underhill estate in Montecito on Hot Spring. And I started doing research on Francis Underhill and realized that, he had come from a very aristocracy type family in the East Coast, traveled extensively, ended up in Santa Barbara, fell in love with it, subsequently spent, 2 summers after that coming there. And when he got married, he decided to settle in Santa Barbara and set up his practice. And that's one noted architect, and there's probably a dozen and a half that have a historic sort of precedent there. George Washington Smith is obviously very well known. But about a year ago, we were really fortunate to have the ICAA from Southern California come up and do a special tour of Santa Barbara. And one of the sort of, cornerstone figures in this tour and the guide was Mark Appleton, who is an absolute treasure of architectural heritage and knowledge, especially in that local area. He grew up there. His grandparents were part of the original owners of Hope Ranch. There were some, absolutely magnificent buildings that he's had a hand in writing books. And before you had mentioned Casa de Herrera, we got a really magical tour of that property, along with some other private residences that you would never see. And so my hat's off to Mark for having made this incredible, intimate, one-on-one connection with all of us and taken us through some of the architectural heritage that's there. And literally 4 days was not enough. You could spend, 4 months if you really wanted to do some research.
Really neat. Really, really neat. I took a tour through Pearl Chase Society a few years back.
Yeah.
It was an architectural tour, and it was specific to George Washington Smith's work. and it was, an all day tour. So to your point, I can see where, I mean, and that just was a scratching of the surface. We didn't obviously have the opportunity to tour everything. So you're right. There's so much rich architectural history here, and so many different, architects that have influenced all of Santa Barbara architecture. Um, so, sort of speaking of iconic architects and also iconic buildings, Mark, what do you find to be sort of the quintessential iconic spots? Of course, we've touched on Lotus Land, we've touched on Casa del Herrero, but if you were to sort of go through in your mind a tour of Santa Barbara, what would you say are sort of some of those iconic places for you?
Well, that's a great question, and you almost don't know where to start because at
Right.
every turn there's something magical in Santa Barbara, and I think that's what draws people there is its sense of history and the marvelous architecture, the gardens, the landscape. So I think we all probably have favorites of our own. I think probably one of the most iconic images of Santa Barbara is right behind you, Sarah, which is the
Okay.
fabulous courthouse. I think this is one of my favorite buildings in the entire world. Every time I visit this building, I'm just in awe of the detailing, the scale, the proportions, and it's just a remarkable building. And it's still used as a courthouse today. So a lot of the public buildings that we see around Santa Barbara, churches and so forth, are still in use today. They're not museums. They're still in use. But so I think the Santa Barbara Courthouse and probably one of the other signature um, monuments for Santa Barbara is its famous mission.
No.
Santa Barbara's mission is called the Queen of the Missions, and it's had a very interesting history because I think it was in 1812 it was hit by a devastating earthquake and destroyed and was rebuilt. I think it's been rebuilt two or three times, and in its current incarnation, it's a church that is in use today. It's a museum, a gift shop, a cemetery, it's a mausoleum, and there's several historic gardens there. And I think Puck, you could probably tell them more about the gardens than I can. But I find the gardens there the most enchanting part of the mission. And the last time I visited probably was a little off season, but you can just see that this was a garden that wasn't just for beauty, but it was a garden to provide the Franciscans with food and vegetables and so forth. So those are probably two of the most famous. And then, as Puck mentioned, the Casa del Herrera is a gem. And then just down the street from where I live, we have the Our Lady of Mount Carmel Church
Mm.
on Hot Springs
Love
Road.
that church. It's
And
so beautiful.
this is one of my favorite buildings. I guess it's sort of New Mexico Pueblo architecture, and it's just a gem. And if you can sit out on the street and look at the detailing on this building. It's warm. It just invites you in. It's a really really special building. So I think where you go in Santa Barbara. Oh, I know what I forgot to mention. My other favorite buildings are right downtown, the Presidio buildings, and the Presidio was I think this was it was a Spanish fort, and this is the beginning of Santa Barbara. This is where Santa Barbara started, and these adobe buildings downtown are treasures, and the magic that I find in them is they're buildings of the earth, and they take you back to another era where simplicity and a sense of warmth just envelops you. And I find these buildings very, very special. And it's important to see them because it's not only the history of California, but it is the history and the beginning of Santa Barbara. So, and I guess we could go on and on about all the great buildings, but those are some of my favorites.
Thank you so much for sharing. So it's so interesting, and it also brings things to mind that sometimes we forget about. It's great.
Right.
So I do think, I touched on this a bit when I was mentioning the magazine, but the lifestyle here is quite inspirational. And also, of course, the architecture design is inspirational because you see in other parts of the country where, you'll look at real estate, let's say in a place like Dallas, and there'll be a Santa Barbara Spanish style home. Wade, can you sort of speak to how the design and the sort of form of architecture here can inspire in other areas, and sort of what your thoughts are on that, and what you've seen throughout your career, and the way that this sort of inspiration translates to other cities?
Well, it's it's interesting because you know when you really look at some of these buildings, as even as iconic as they are, uh, there is a simplicity to them, and there's a modesty to them. They were built of local materials. They were there's wonderful craftspeople in that community as well. I mean, creatives are drawn to beautiful, unique places, and the quality of light, the weather, the geography, the proximity to the ocean, all of those things create a unique environment where I think you just have lots of creatives, and because the community embraces the creative endeavors, you have a very vibrant sort of creative community. And but so what I've noticed is that things are put together very well, but they're modest in their form because the weather is so wonderful and so compatible to live in, that you don't need to have so much enclosure. You actually can survive with less, because gathering outside the walls is just a pleasant experience as gathering in walls. And so what I love about the sort of ideology architecturally of how we're responding is that the architecture creates layers of privacy and some refuge and enclosure, but it also allows for a flexible plan so that the inside and the outside can kind of be very easily accessed. What I see is that, and that is a very, when you almost think of it, it's very simplistic and historic. It's also incredibly modern at the same time. And so I think as we as architects start looking for precedents, and we're looking for something that's timeless but embraces something that's more of a modern ideology, I think this architecture really adapts itself very well because it is timeless. It does create enclosure. It gives you that safety and refuge, but it also allows for these sort of boundaries to be dissolved between inside and outside, which I think is something that architects are pursuing everywhere right
now. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Hooray.
We love that, right? Especially Buck. I also think it's worth mentioning when we're talking about some of the iconic spots in Santa Barbara, we also have a very unique set of hotel properties, from San Ysidro Ranch to the Miramar to the Four Seasons Biltmore, just some of the history there. Mark and Wade, do you have any commentary on some of those hotel properties that I mentioned?
Sure. You just mentioned my favorite ones. So, the Biltmore has always been sort of the main sort of anchor in Montecito, and is just a magnificent building in one of the prettiest settings anywhere. And I know that it's currently, I think, going under a renovation. And of course, the San Ysidro Ranch is, it's got a great history. It has remarkable charm. It's got one of the best restaurants anywhere in Santa Barbara. And that was recently redone by also Mark Appleton. And the dining room there, both on the upper terrace and the lower terrace, is just a magical place to eat. With the reopening of the Miramar Hotel, the one thing that was wonderful about this was that we came through a very, very tragic period with the Santa Barbara mudslides, and the community was devastated. And with the opening of the Miramar, it seemed to revitalize the community, and it added energy to the community. And for that, I'm very grateful. The timing was just right for that. And, there are other great hotels and small little inns. Santa Barbara offers something for everybody. And I think that's what's wonderful. You've got the great hotels at the high end, and you have wonderful, charming inns and guest cottages and so forth. So there's places for everybody to stay in very different areas. And each area of Santa Barbara, Montecito, the Santa Ynez Valley, all have their own distinct signature. Like where Puck is living out in the Los Olivos, Santa Ynez area, has a very different feeling than Montecito, the Mesa, all these different areas. So it has so much to offer.
I agree.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's always fun if we go and take a look at a piece of property. And so a realtor calls and says, "Hey, I've got a client that's looking at a piece of property. Love to go up and take a look at it." It's always interesting because you just never know what you're going to discover for a view or orientation. I remember the first time I went to the El Encanto, it was the same thing. I get up there and here's this resort that goes back to the 20s that sits high above the sort of Riviera. It has this amazing view of Santa Barbara, the whole downtown. Went to a fundraiser there. It just felt so timeless and interesting. And even the New Californian, I mean, what it did to Lower State Street and the Funk Zone, it was amazing. I mean, I lived a block away from there and it was under construction for a long time. But when it was done, it just harmonized and energized that entire area before you get to the wharf. And I just love being able to poke around and stop in and at a Enoteca, glass of wine, even in the sort of warehouse zone, and to sort of see that creative sort of more urban sort of thing that is also a part of Santa Barbara. And that's what I love about it. Like literally you can be in all these different environments literally within the 3-block radius, which is phenomenal. Not too many places can offer that.
You're so right about that. And speaking of that area and Funk Zone and right down there by Hotel Californian, we have the Moxie Museum that opened for children and families. I personally like going there probably more than my 3-year-old. I have so much fun going there. And then we have, of course, the Santa Barbara Museum of Art, which is iconic, and going through their, remodel. We also have UCSB, so rich in the arts, with the, arts and lecture program and exhibitions. Do any of you ever attend any of those at arts and lectures or enjoy time at museums here in Santa Barbara?
Oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think it's a great part of our culture here, and there's just so much to discover even in those places as well. I would love to talk a bit more with you, Puck, about just the incredible gardens throughout Santa Barbara, and would love to hear more about Los Olivos. I absolutely love the Santa Ynez Valley. I think it is an absolute gem, that entire area, and such a part of what makes Santa Barbara fabulous. I would love to hear you kind of elaborate on where you live and just some of the maybe differences in some of the gardens here in Santa Barbara proper, and is the climate much different up in your area, and how do you sort of adapt with your business in those two sort of different enclaves?
Well, I think we can go back to what Mark and Wade were talking about in terms of what has made Santa Barbara such a successful community architecturally, really starting with the Mission and the Presidio, and now coming full circle into contemporary architecture. This idea of responding to the environment, and of course that started in with the Moors and the Spanish and Andalusia, and creating these wonderful courtyards. And one of my favorite things are the paseos in Santa Barbara, because it on a warm day, having these narrow shaded spaces outdoors that then open into wonderful sort of dappled courtyards with dappled shade is just a great experience. And so many of the garden experiences go from, very sort of small micro moments of just seeing a collection of succulents or cycads against a building to the major estates of Montecito that Lockwood DeForest did, and the siting of buildings. We the one of the things that makes Santa Barbara really unique, and also the Santa Ynez Valley, are our mountains that run east west. There are only 7 mountain ranges in the world that run east west, and so our the city faces the Santa Barbara Channel, which is facing south, and it's very interesting to take visitors to the beach at sunset, and they're looking around for the sun and you're going, look to the right, look to the right. um, and so it creates this incredible microclimate that allowed the great nurserymen in the early 20th century to really explore so many different types of plant material. But they also, Lockwood DeForest was just a genius at helping site buildings. So one of actually an old estate next to Oprah Winfrey's, you look down this magnificent pool, reflecting pool, and there's an alley of large trees on either side of this very simple, very beautiful pool, and it looks right into one of the saddles, one of the dips of the mountain range behind Santa Barbara, and it just pulls everything together. And I think that's another thing that people who are not familiar with Santa Barbara are always amazed once they get here, are the mountains. Everybody sort of talks about the ocean, but people who build and live here for a while, the mountain views are really the extraordinary views, because they change throughout the seasons with the light, and they're very rugged, very wild, and you drive over the mountains to where I live in the town of Los Olivos, and that the valley was settled by well, there were old ranchos and Spanish land grants and a lot of cattle, and of course now we grow lots and lots of grapes, and it's a very different climate from Santa Barbara. I think one of the things that drew me to it was that it's we have cold winters, we get freezes, and it gets a little warm in the summer, and so we actually have an autumn, which I invite you to see in November. All the vineyards start turning beautiful colors, and so our native sycamores and poplars start turning golden yellow, and it's a really special place. And one of the things that's happening in my little town now is Maddie's Tavern, which was one of the original stagecoach stops, is being redone, and it's going to be an auberge hotel, and we're all so excited about that. I had the good fortune with Christine to go see the model room during construction, and it's really going to be fun, and we're so excited about that.
That will be such a gem there. Maddie's is just iconic in the valley. Also, the valley is such a celebrated place, the wine country. It draws people from all over the world. How have you seen that change in the years that you've lived in Los Olivos, Puck? Have you seen a lot of growth with that? And it seems like
Well,
there are more and more tasting rooms popping up, and it's actually our
actually,
fall issue. We have a big section that's dedicated to celebrating autumn in the wine country. So I liked when you said that you have a true autumn there.
um, actually, that was my first job when I arrived in the Santa Ynez Valley. Um, the Firestones, who were some of the first winemakers in the Santa Ynez Valley, asked me what I was going to do after my honeymoon, and I said I didn't know. And they said, "Well, come pick grapes." And so I did. I worked the whole harvest picking grapes.
How
You
And
were
then
Lucy Ricardo.
and then
exactly.
and then went into the lab because I knew what titration meant, and they dragged me into the lab, and I learned about winemaking, and I scrubbed tanks with Rick Longoria and the Sanfords, and anyway,
Fun.
it was really really fun, and I think that we were just very lucky that there were people that came early on to the valley to explore this idea of winemaking who were incredibly talented, inspired people, and they ended up making really good wine. Um, and so that just drew other people into the valley because they saw the potential. And so, oh my gosh, now we have so many wineries, and that's actually one of the really fun parts of our practice. We've worked on a number of wineries, and it's really interesting architecturally and siting buildings so that it actually works with how different vintners make wine. The way the buildings, the wineries are set up is very specific to each individual's winemaking process.
Oh wow, that's really neat.
So come on up, drive over the mountain.
Gladly will. I was curious to hear from each of you. Obviously, we all love and adore Santa Barbara. I would love to sort of have everybody share with our guest today, what is your favorite enclave in Santa Barbara? I think I'll start with you, Mark. What is your absolute favorite spot?
Well, that's a tough one. I mean,
Right.
I don't know how you can pick one spot. But you know what Puck had just talked about earlier, Autumn. She talked about the light and in Santa Barbara. And one of the things that I find magical about Santa Barbara is the quality of light here. Having grown up in the desert, autumn wasn't a particularly favorite season of mine because it was dusty and windy. And I arrived in Santa Barbara, and the autumn is remarkable. The sun is low in the horizon, and so one of my favorite spots is to go down to the beach at sunset each day that I'm there, and take my shoes off and walk on the beach and watch the sunset. And I mean, I know it sounds redundant again, but it's a magical experience. And every day the sunset is unique. The sky is just a rainbow of blues and purples. And what you said, Puck, about the magic of Santa Barbara is looking at the mountains. When you're on the beach and you look back at the mountains during sunset, and you see it change, go from the grays and blues and purples and change hues, it's really spectacular. So I guess if I had to pick an inspirational spot, I would say I love going down to the end of San Ysidro Road and standing on the beach and walking along there and looking out at the ocean.
Beautiful. I love that. What about you, Wade? What would you say is your favorite neighborhood, enclave, spot, whatever it might be? What sort of speaks to you here in Santa Barbara?
So um, I'm just gonna. For me, it's an event, and it's the farmers markets. I think that they are like, for whatever reason, I think I'm most proud of being a Santa Barbara resident on market days. I think as I'm walking from vendor to vendor and I'm looking at these, earnest people working these farms and bringing in all this amazing bounty and all this beauty of nature. And I walking along on State Street, or on Saturday mornings, I'm walking through Market Square, and I'm just, I'm having a coffee, and the weather's perfect, and there's the smell of all this amazing stuff that's baked and brought in. And little kids and people playing music. And I just think to myself, what an extraordinary place to call home. And what an unbelievable, simple sort of event to be able to be a part of on, to start your weekend or to take a break during the middle of the week and walk down State Street. It's you look up the hill, and as the sun's setting, you see that pinkness in the sky that's reflecting off the mountain stone. And, you see, the waxy texture of a palm tree, or you see the coming of the sunset. I don't know. There's just so many simple things. The entire area is just so blessed. But I think my favorite time is market days.
I love that. I like that you brought that up. That is such a good addition to this conversation. It's really a good point. What about you, Puck? What is your favorite spot or moment, or do you have a favorite?
Well, in Santa Barbara, I of course have to plug the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, which is a real treasure. And there is one spot when you go into the garden, there is this wonderful old oak on the left-hand side of the meadow. And you walk, and they have really beautiful meadow of native grasses, and in the spring when it's blooming, filled with pop, and it just draws your eye up into through the canyon to the mountains. It's just a terrific spot. And also Lotus Land. When Mark was talking about the lights, going through the cactus garden and seeing the light just sort of dancing through the various forms. It's I don't know if Dale Chihuly ever visited there, but I'm sure he would be inspired by it because it reminds me of the way light reflects off of sculptures. And then I have to say, the Santa Ynez Valley, um, Bob's Wellbread just opened in Ballard, and it's the best croissant on this continent. And you can get your little croissant and then drive up Figueroa Mountain Road, past where, of course, Michael Jackson used to live, all the way to the top. And you take a little hike to the top of the peak, and you look over the top of Grass Mountain, and you look into this wilderness that is like Wyoming and Montana and Idaho all combined. And it's just amazing to me that we have this great juxtaposition of all this wonderful culture and sort of aesthetic delights with this vast wilderness just lurking behind us. It's, of course, with our mudslides and our fires, it's can be challenging, but it's an amazing space. I think it puts life into perspective for sure.
Very true. Very, very true. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I think at this point, we would love to allow the audience to ask any questions of our panelists. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to write into the chat, we'd be happy to take them now. I have one here for you, Puck. Puck, curious, do your client requests differ in Santa Barbara from other areas such as Los Angeles? And if so, would you please share with us how?
I find clients here are ready to maybe turn down the volume a little bit and want a space that is important for family and sort of gathering their thoughts. They've been busy people and they want to stay busy, but they're looking for a balance. And one of the things that I really enjoy is creating gardens that, 5 years later, people will say, "Oh my gosh, I was pruning something." And these are guys that I didn't even know knew where to get pruned ears, and they're actually enjoying everything about their space. It's not just about the inside or the outside. It's a whole experience, and um, I'm I'm not sure they're at first interested in plants, but because we have such great nurseries here, and we take our clients to the nurseries with us and let them explore with us, everybody gets sort of very interested in things, and that's always a fun thing.
I love that. That's great. Okay, one of the questions that has come in is Santa Barbara has a very relaxed resort like feel. How does that affect the creative process, and what luxuries are afforded that only can come from having a workspace in a locale such as this? So perhaps you, Wade or Mark, would like to take this question?
Go ahead, Wade.
Wade?
Well, having had all the experience of the last 7 months and working from home a lot, I think that being in an environment that does have that sort of backdrop is something that I've been drawn to, I think, most of my life. And when I look back at where I've ended up being happiest, it always seems like I am in close proximity to a destination for people trying to get away, and it's because there's something unique, but there's also um, the things that sort of heighten the experience, right? There's creative and good restaurants, there's creative artisans and galleries, and there is musicians, and there are gardens and horticulture, and there are things that you find that are attractions in places that are resort like, because people are trying to have a heightened experience in those locations. They want to feel like they're truly thriving, not just surviving when they're on vacation. And so you have all of those amenities right there. So it's kind of wonderful to actually, when you do get a break from working, to actually just kind of look up and indulge a little bit in what's there that people so desperately are trying to get to and experience.
Thank you, Wade. Mark, there's a question for you that came in. How would you describe the Santa Barbara design community, and how does it differ from other cities that you've worked in? What would you say makes it unique?
Well, I think the community itself makes it very unique, but it's also the people that live here and are drawn to Santa Barbara. And like Puck said, I think it's a time they realize it's time to turn the volume down. People seem to be much more relaxed here. If you go to the major cities, there's a tempo and a pace that you don't find in Santa Barbara. It's not New York, it's not Los Angeles, it's not London. Santa Barbara has a very, very unique energy to it, and it's one of the reasons I was drawn there. And it's a very nurturing environment. And even though I'm very busy here in Santa Barbara and do quite a bit of work here, my daily work, which somewhere else might be aggravating and frustrating, is a pleasure here because I'm always looking out at the ocean, at the mountains. I find that the community is a very resilient, supportive community, and people here are wonderful to work with. And I think it's because of the relaxed atmosphere of Santa Barbara. It just creates this wonderful atmosphere for people. So it's a very nurturing environment to work in. And I'm always thrilled when we have more work here and I don't have to travel elsewhere.
Nice, that's great. Wade, there's another question that came in for you. Aside from Francis Underhill and George Washington Smith, what other local architects do you admire and look to for precedent in your work?
Well, I think you have to look at, like, people that have been practicing all the way through. So, Mark Appleton, I brought his name up earlier. Mark's office does really extraordinary work. William Hefner, their office does really wonderful work. They've been in this location for a long time. And so I'm inspired by the architects that are practicing there right now, because they're continuing to preserve and to heighten the offerings of the local artisans. So these seemingly simple stucco buildings are very complex. There's recipes for different types of stucco and the finishes and the paints that go on them, the sealants, and essentially how they're troweled. The ingredients of the sort of the plaster also, can create all different kinds of finishes. Watching an amazing roofer put together and compose, the end pieces of a barrel tiled roof, extraordinary. And so they may look simple, but the reason they look simple is because there's excruciating detail that has worked its way into the craftsmanship. And I'm always amazed at how the architects and the craftspeople, the contractors, are achieving such a high level of refinement, not only in their businesses, but in their artistry.
Yes.
That's great.
I think that's really true for Santa Barbara. There's a lot of respect for the trades in Santa Barbara, and we've worked with masons over, a few decades in our office, who are just extraordinary, and we really learn from one another. And like Wade was saying, they're just really special people, and it makes creating these projects so much better, because there's a real sense of craftsmanship about walls and roofs and stairways and tile work that is really special to the area.
Yeah, you're working with artists here. People take their work very seriously. They're very proud of what they do. They're proud to show you their work. So you're working with people that are as enthusiastic as you are about the work that they do. And I think we're very privileged to have an abundance of people here to select.
And what they teach us too is amazing,
Yes.
isn't it? I mean, I learn every time.
Yeah.
I think that's something clients, they'll say, well, what is this wall going to look like? And say, well, we'll do a sample with the mason, because I found that people they literally can read stone and create this beautiful wall. I could draw it all day long, but it's that relationship with the mason that makes it really special.
Mhm.
That's really. I was on a walk with my husband yesterday through Montecito, and I was telling him my great grandfather was a mason. And my mom had driven me around parts of Montecito when I was a little kid, showing me some of the walls that he did. And so I have
That's
an
so
affinity
cool.
for what you were just talking about. Okay, let's see. It looks like we might have another question. Oh, here we go. So there's a question for Wade and Puck. How do you both address the concerns of wildfires within your architecture and landscape designs?
Wayne, do you want to go first?
Well, sure. I think that the indigenous materials that you see, embracing in the Spanish colonial sort of tradition, lot of that architecture is already sort of like, somewhat indigenous for a reason, is it's resistant to fire. Clay tile roofs are not going to sort of ignite with a spark like a wood roof would. And wood frame buildings, for the most part, are sort of encapsulated in the masonry. And so, there is already, I think, an inherent sort of fireproof construction. I think where the landscape and the architecture blur a little bit, putting in a lot of plants that essentially could be flammable or dry out near a dwelling. Things like that are things that you probably want to avoid a little bit. And there are ways to sort of passively create something that just won't ignite as spontaneously than other parts of the country where you're used to a lot of rainfall. I have a practice, obviously, in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that it's a very different kind of environment to work in. But I find myself utilizing all the lessons that I'm learning out there. I think drought resistant adaptability, being able to sort of use passive ideas about what a good building is like, being able, the wonderful things about Santa Barbara is there's not one place that I've ever been there I've lived in or worked in that's actually had air conditioning. It's pretty remarkable that the buildings there do have windows that operate, and they allow that beautiful sea breeze to come in during the day. And then at night, there's just radiational cooling from the climate being somewhat dry. And you end up, having, the environments inside are wonderful because they're always full of fresh air. That's very unusual in other parts of the country. People, have a tendency to rely on mechanical systems. And that's another one of those things that I think makes living so much nicer there. It's just that ability to not have to rely on that. And nature provides you most everything you need.
As far as landscape goes, I think that thinking about our landscape and fires has certainly been changing in the last, say, 10 years. One of the things I think we have to look at is the idea that a landscape is fireproof. Given where a lot of our houses are located, up in the foothills of the mountains, there is a lot of material in the mountains to burn, and it is a natural cycle in this part of the world to have our vegetation burn. And the Chumash, the indigenous Indians, really understood that. And we're now just beginning to rethink our whole attitude about fire. So we think about are sort of zones around homes, so that frankly, we're not planting palm trees or Italian cypress literally right next to a wall anymore, because it simply doesn't make sense if you're in a very high fire area. But one of the things I have to say about fire too, I have some really dear friends who have a home that was almost two major fires in Santa Barbara came very close to their house, to the point that it melted the curtains in their house, literally melted them to the wall. And they had a lot of damage, but their home was saved because they had defensible space where the fire trucks could come in and park, and the firemen felt safe on their property because of the way we had designed their motor court. It was very accessible for them, and so their house was easily defended. But what was really miraculous, we had a National Garden tour scheduled a year from when the fire went through. And, they had their oak trees were singed. It was incredible. A year later, the garden looked like you never would have imagined that a fire had blown through there. The everything really came back because we were using plant material that has a lot of resilience. And I was just visiting another friend's ranch who experienced a bad fire, and to see all of these plants like cycads and elephant palms coming back in about 6 months after the fire. We just have to really choose things carefully, but it can still be a really kind of joyous thing in a way, and remind us that we are resilient and our environment is resilient if we're sensitive
Mhm.
and actually listen to our environment.
Mhm.
There's one more question that came through for you. One of our attendees is asking if your fire methodologies are related to permaculture principles.
Oh, wow. Um, this is why I love doing these things, because I always feel like it's a pop quiz. Gosh, yes, I think that, without going into the weeds, I do think that principles of permaculture, which I think the name speaks for itself without taking up a lot of time. Um, Permaculture implies that you are creating an environment that is sustainable for the plants you're planning to thrive. For instance, in a vegetable garden, the plants that you're planting next to one another and the spacing and the way they're planted allows them to create an environment that sustains them. And so, yes, with I looking at um, environmental assessment as a whole, then your approach to fire would and fire management would be sort of synchronous with permaculture. I hope that answers the question. And they can always email me and we can have a really good nerdy chat about that kind of thing.
Perfect. She said it does, and thank you. At this time, do we have any other questions for our fabulous panelists? All right, well, if not, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, and thank you so much to each and every one of you, Puck, Wade, and Mark.
Thank you.
It's been fantastic to share this hour with you, and you three are just a wealth of knowledge, and so thank you so much for taking the time to be here today.
Thanks
Thank
so much.
you.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everyone.
We'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.